Molly Bloom walked into her kitchen, naked and sweaty. Humming happily to herself, she took a bottle of water out of the refrigerator, opened it, and began to drink. Soon, her husband, Leo, also naked and sweaty, followed her. He put his arms around her waist, brought his nose close to her cheek, and began to enjoy the pleasant vibrations that traveled from her buzzing mouth to his sticky face. Molly had never noticed it, but she always unconsciously hummed the 30th movement of Bach's Goldberg Variations after a satisfying session between the sheets. Indeed, she continued to hum it long after the physical euphoria had subsided. Molly was obsessed with Bach. She listened to it non-stop almost anywhere she could, at home, in the car, or at the office. As a young girl, she had spent 10 years studying piano. There was still an old piano in her parents' house on which she had practiced playing the Well-Tempered Clavier and the Goldberg Variations, but since she had gotten married, she had had to settle for listening only. There was no room for a piano in their small apartment. Her lifelong dream was to have a house big enough to fit a piano in it. Leo didn't share her passion for late Baroque music. He was more into rock and metal, and he kept his headphones on, enjoying AC/DC and Led Zeppelin. However, he cherished her post-coital purr and her enthusiasm as she explained to him the story behind each variation. He knew, for example, that the song was based on a famous German children's song. She also explained to him that Bach himself considered it one of the pinnacles of his achievement and immortalized it in his only well-known confirmed portrait of him holding a sheet of sheet music from the famous opening aria. Leo never admitted it, but thanks to Molly, he came to love many of the genius's keyboard works. "Do you know how much I love you?" he asked his loving wife, snuggling his nose into her neck. "Yes, you just showed it to me for over 2 hours," she giggled. "No, really, how come I have the most beautiful, sexy, intelligent, and devoted woman in the world?" She cringed a little, turned to him, smiling, wrapped her arms around his neck and said, "I'm asking myself the same question about you, handsome." Then she released herself from his grip, grabbed his palm and pulled him with her. "Let's go take a shower. I need someone to soap my back." "Just your back?" he asked playfully. "Maybe I can find another use for you." She winked at him and headed for the bathroom, humming her favorite tune again. Later that night, Molly and Leo were sitting in their small living room watching the Italian Netflix series Fidelity. Suddenly, Leo heard his wife sobbing softly, so he grabbed the remote and stopped the broadcast. "What's wrong, honey?" he asked her with concern in his voice. "It's so sad," she whimpered. "They've only drifted apart because of a misunderstanding, even though they love each other." Well, it wasn't exactly a misunderstanding. He kind of cheated on her mentally, and she cheated on him physically. They're both to blame for the dissolution of their marriage. "But it could have been avoided," she exclaimed passionately. "I don't see how. Once she crosses the red line of physical betrayal, there's no turning back," he said firmly. "How can you be so cruel? We're all flesh and blood. Even if she was wrong for a short time, he acted irrationally and in cold blood." Leo eyed her suspiciously and said, "I'm amazed at you. There may be people who are willing to share the love of their life with others, but they do it openly and with the consent of their spouse. They don't plot behind their back. At least I am not one of them. I will never put up with getting sloppy seconds. Just thinking about it makes me sick, not to mention the risk of sexually transmitted diseases and the living nightmare of raising someone else's bastard. I would never waste the rest of my life living with someone who is an unworthy, untrustworthy, subversive bastard." Molly's eyes widened like saucers as she suddenly jumped up from the couch and ran into the bedroom. Leo stared at her in confusion for a while and then went back to watching the mini-series, which he found very interesting. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. It was about 3 p.m. the next day when Leo received a strange phone call from his old friend Bob while at work. "Hey, Leo, how are you doing?" "Hey, Bob, how are you doing? Everything okay?" "Yeah. Listen, does your wife still drive that ugly green Mini Cooper, or did you sell it?" "She still drives it. Why do you ask?" "I'm on my way to meet a client on Eccles Street, and I just saw a car that looks just like hers parked next to an upscale Bimmer, next to a very large house. And since I don't know many green minis, I thought I should give you a call. Did you see who was driving? No, I was just driving by and had to move on. Okay, thanks, Bob. Let me call her and find out what's going on. Leo finished talking to Bob and dialed Molly's number, but was immediately redirected to her voicemail. 10 minutes later, he tried calling her again, but was unsuccessful. He knew that she usually put her phone on airplane mode during work meetings, so he called the receptionist in her office and learned that she had left early on some business. Later that evening, Leo seemed less relaxed than usual, as he had dinner at home with his wife. Is everything all right? His loving wife asked him. You seem a little preoccupied. Oh, yes, just... Tell me, were you in Eccles Street this afternoon? It didn't escape Leo the startled expression that froze on Molly's face for a moment, or the way her eyes darted up and to the right before she answered. Yes. Why do you ask? Bob happened to be driving by in the neighborhood and noticed your car when you had just parked there. Oh, yeah. My boss's wife had to leave the house on short notice, and he asked me to babysit his young daughter for a couple hours while I was still getting paid, of course. Couldn't he have done it himself? He had a very important meeting that day that he couldn't miss. Why not ask one of the secretaries? They're all new, and I don't think he trusts them enough. After a pause of a few seconds, Molly continued. Oh, you should see their huge living room and the gorgeous Steinway grand piano in the center. I loved playing on it so much. I wish that one day we too could afford the luxury of having such an instrument. Maybe someday we will, he said grimly. Later that night, as they lay on their bed, back to back, both were absorbed in deep thought. Molly thought she should meet with her boss sometime next week for a thorough conversation to see how they could disentangle themselves from the unwanted tangle they had created without burning bridges. Their married life hung in the balance. She had gotten 2 promotions in the last 6 months and owed her boss a lot for the advancement and support he was giving her, but things were spiraling out of control. It all started when her boss walked into her office one day and heard piano music playing in the background. He asked her if she could play too, or if she was just listening. She replied that she actually played quite well and was close to choosing a career in music. She told him that she hadn't had the opportunity to play in recent years, and that she really missed it. He invited her to come over to his house sometime to play his fancy grand piano, redeeming his unused piano. One Monday afternoon, he stopped by her office on his way home, told her he was leaving early, and invited her to follow him and play at his house for a few hours. It made sense to her at the time when he explained to her that his wife takes their daughter to the tennis club on Mondays and Thursdays so that no one would interfere with her playing. She told herself that playing one of the most prestigious pianos in the world was an opportunity she couldn't pass up, so she accepted his invitation. She hadn't played for 20 minutes when he showed up with a bottle of wine, 2 glasses, and a wide smile on his face. She still didn't understand how she'd ended up in his bed that day, but she shrugged off the guilt by convincing herself that it had been a one-off and pointless activity. After the second time, she told herself that it was important to her career and that playing that beautiful piano nourished her soul. He wasn't particularly demanding, and it was just a few minutes of relaxed and emotionless rough sex once or twice a week. No real harm done, she convinced herself. The fact that he was handsome and well-endowed made her decision easier. Just a small change from the usual gentle lovemaking with my husband, she told herself. And anyway, this would all be over as soon as we saved up enough money for a house, stopped taking the pill, and started a family. Leopold Bloom, lying on the other side of the bed, was also having trouble sleeping. Serious doubts were troubling his mind. He had been happily married for the last 3 years. He knew for a fact that Molly was happy too, but now an ominous premonition gripped him. His eyes moistened at the memory of the party where he'd first met her 4 years ago. A memory that had been so sweet until a few days ago, but it had soured. He hadn't mentioned to his wife that the receptionist at her workplace hadn't mentioned a babysitter, but rather errands. Nor had he mentioned that Bob had said he'd seen her parked next to a luxury car. If her boss and his wife weren't home, who the hell did that car belong to? He wondered. And why had she suddenly decided a few months ago that from now on it would be sexless Mondays? At the time, her argument that they should let their bodies rest after a tumultuous weekend had made sense, but now it had taken on a completely different meaning. 2 months ago, she had also declared sexless Thursdays, arguing that they should let their bodies rest before the craziness of the weekend. 5 days a week had been more than enough for him, but now he had serious doubts about her motives. Deep into the night, he decided that he would not have sex with his wife until all his doubts were completely removed. Over the next few days, things seemed to return to normal in the Bloom family home. Although Leo gently rejected his wife's nightly advances, citing fatigue, he gave her no real reason to suspect anything was wrong. It was 3:30 p.m. on Thursday when Leo informed his manager that he needed to leave early. 20 minutes later, he was on Eccles Street. It didn't take him long to find Molly's brightly painted car parked next to a brand-new off-road BMW next to a huge house in an upscale neighborhood. He parked his car on the street, headed straight for the front door, and was about to ring the bell when his heart stopped beating. Through the thick wooden door came the thunderous sounds of a piano that filled the space around him and shattered his heart. He immediately recognized the sounds of the glorious German children's song that had just become infamous. He turned around, got back into his car, and drove off. When Molly returned home late at night in high spirits, she heard a marvelous sound coming from her apartment. The familiar sounds harmonized perfectly with what she had just hummed. "This is going to be a wonderful evening," she thought. Opening the door, she immediately called out, "Baby, I'm home," and was surprised when no one answered. She started looking for Leo in all the rooms of the apartment, but he wasn't there. Maybe he went out to buy something for dinner, she thought. She was very anxious after her favorite variation that came from the home stereo. The music ended and immediately started playing again, as if the stereo was set to cycle. She was looking for the remote control to check the system's settings when a glint on the buffet countertop caught her eye. As she stepped closer, she saw a wedding ring placed on a small, handwritten note. "Thank you for saving me from wasting my life with someone not worthy of it. Molly Bloom will never hum Bach's 30th variation."